Hey everyone, this is the Science-Based Species channel, and today I'm talking with Dr. Brian Kennedy. He continues to be a very prominent researcher in the field of aging and longevity. He earned his PhD at MIT, and he's the previous president and CEO of the Buck Institute from 2010 to 2016. And now you remain the professor at the Institute.
I'm actually a full professor, actually, at NUS. Um, my main appointment is in Singapore. So it's at National University of Singapore, and I'm director of the Center for Healthy Aging.
Okay, excellent. And so, yeah, it's really great to talk to you because my channel focuses on research in aging, promising research in aging and longevity. And you're such a prominent figure in this this area of study.
I think that the question of whether aging is a disease is almost a semantic argument. The way I think about it is that it's the biggest risk factor for every disease we care about. And if you look at the diseases that we've been relatively successful in treating, like diabetes and cardiovascular disease, it's because we identified the key risk factors: hyperglycemia, hypercholesterolemia, hypertriglyceridemia, and we treat these things before people have heart attacks, before they get overt diabetes, and that's why we're successful. So to me, aging is the biggest risk factor of them all because it's more important than hyperglycemia and hypercholesterolemia, even for those diseases, but it's also the biggest risk factor for Alzheimer's disease and cancer and retinal diseases with aging and a whole range of other things. So if we can treat aging as a risk factor, target it and slow down the process or even reverse it, I think the impact we'll have is that we'll delay or prevent the onset of a whole range of chronic diseases simultaneously.
Yeah, there's a common graph that you'll see a lot of researchers in this field will bring up where they'll show, like what you said, cardiovascular disease and cancer and lung diseases all increasing around like the age of 50.
Yeah.
And then in laboratories, they're manipulating aging, right, in animals where they can like accelerate and decelerate it.
Right. In animals, if you're a mouse, you're in good shape. We already know how to slow aging. I think one of the big challenges is that we need to start testing these interventions in humans. And that's why I'm at the Center for Healthy Aging in Singapore, because we have a strong clinical presence here. And we're really interested in trying to validate whether interventions that slow aging in animal models work in the human realm. And if they do, then I think we're off to the races in terms of what we can achieve.
Yeah, Singapore has one of the highest life expectancies, doesn't it?
It does. It's also kind of a perfect storm for aging because it has an extremely long life expectancy, but it also has a very low birth rate and very little room for immigration. I don't know if you've been there, but it's like 260 square kilometers, so with 5.5 million people, so it's hard to put a lot more people there.
Yeah, I'm in the United States. We definitely need to take some tips, because we're so low on the life expectancy in developed nations.
That's a long discussion, and it's problems in healthcare, problems in what people eat in the U.S., lack of exercise, goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
But in Singapore in 2030, we're only going to have 2 workers for every retired person. So there's almost a mandate to say, how do we keep these retired people healthy, functioning, working, active in society, independent? Because if they don't do that, the whole island is going to be full of hospitals, and they can't afford that. So I think that the challenge here is very imminent, and we're here to try to develop strategies we can implement across the whole island to make health span longer.
I think I've heard people call that the Great Tsunami, right?
Silver Tsunami. Yeah,
Silver Tsunami. And then people, I think it's by around 2020 is when we'll have more people above the age 65 than people under the age of 5.
Already, I think that's true. But yeah, you're right. So, which is a brand new thing. We've never had a demography that's anything close to that on Earth. And so it's the climate change of healthcare. We have to do something about this, or we can't just have people living 10, 15 years of chronic diseases when there are that many people in that age range. And it's also not good for them. We need to change the paradigm. Right now we do sick care. We wait till people get sick, and then we spend a lot of money and generally keep them sick. We keep them alive, but we don't bring them all the way back to health. And we need to start actually doing healthcare if we're going to make a difference, I think.
Yeah, there's a bunch of drugs right now, promising molecules that can not only increase health span, but possibly even maximum lifespan. One of the drugs that you focus on is rapamycin. Could you discuss some of that research that you do on rapamycin and how it increases health span and lifespan?
Yeah, we got to rapamycin and the mTOR pathway because we were studying aging in simple invertebrate models like or non-vertebrate models like yeast and worms. And what we found is that that pathway had a big conserved effect on aging, and it also was in flies. And more recently, a number of labs have shown that reducing TOR signaling extends lifespan and health span in mice. So really, it's the gold standard, I think, right now of a pathway linked to aging because it works everywhere in multiple mouse strains. And already there's beginning to be human data that using drugs to turn down TOR signaling can have positive impacts in an aging setting. So, we're excited about that pathway. Now, rapamycin is a drug that's clinically approved, and it does have side effects, but I think that there are strategies that are available that we can deliver low doses of the drug in a clinical testing setting without encountering side effects. And then on top of that, there are a number of companies, including one, Mount Tem Biopharma, that I'm involved with, but there are a number of others as well that are trying to make novel strategies to inhibit mTOR so that you could get the efficacy of rapamycin without the side effects. And probably there's a whole handful of companies taking different approaches in that regard.
Okay. Isn't there a human study not a while back that they gave low doses of rapamycin to humans?
There's a study with everolimus, which is a derivative of rapamycin.
Okay.
And what they found is that if you give people 65 and above this drug for a window of 4 to 6 weeks and then give them an influenza vaccine after that, they have a much better response to the influenza vaccine. Nice. And a more recent paper, which also is a more complicated strategy at inhibiting mTOR, what they found is that even a year after you stop giving the drug to people, they still have a dramatic reduction in infection rate. Sweet. Respiratory infections are one of the big causes of mortality in the elderly. So if you can reverse immune senescence, have the immune system work better and get less respiratory infections, that's a very positive effect on aging. So I think the signs are really good for TOR inhibition in humans as well in terms of preserving health span and even lifespan.
And there weren't that many adverse side effects in the study where they vaccinated people. But what about the second study? Were there
the same thing? But they're dosing it in a way that keeps side effects low. Okay. Now the disadvantage of, obviously that's what you have to do in a healthy population. So I understand their motivation. But the potential disadvantage is if you dose that low, maybe the effect size you get is also lower. So if we can make derivatives that have better efficacy to side effects, we can dose higher and maybe get even bigger positive effects. So that's kind of how a number of companies are thinking.
Sweet. Is that what you're doing at your company, the Mount Tem company?
Yeah. Yeah, we've got derivatives of rapamycin that have different properties, and we're trying to identify the ones that inhibit mTORC1 pathway, but not the mTORC2 pathway. And we find that if you increase that differential inhibition, at least in animal models, you get a very strong efficacy and very low toxicity. So what we want to do now is to take some of these new molecules into human studies and see where that leads us.
Excellent. Do you plan on conducting any human studies in the near future?
Well, certainly we're doing that in Singapore, but we're probably not going to start with new chemical entities in Singapore because we want to work with known commodities first when we're studying healthy aging. The last thing we want to do is to take a compound and discover some unknown toxicity. It would really hurt the aging field. So we're going to start with known commodities. In the drug space, in these companies, what they're thinking largely is let's start by trying to target specific age-related diseases that are linked to aging. And you've got more of a tolerance to do clinical trials in that space. And then we'll start collecting data on aging as well as a secondary endpoint in those studies. And if it looks good, maybe we'll transition those compounds into pure aging studies. But with new compounds that have never been in man before, I'm hesitant to put them in healthy people to start with.
Yeah.
At least, I mean, you know, in any big way.
Yeah. So how do you foresee these drugs? There's a few of them in. You brought up a list of them that there's some promising ones, like not only just rapamycin but metformin and NSAIDs, ibuprofen and aspirin and acarbose and then resveratrol, NAD plus precursors, factors in young blood and senolytics. I saw you bring that up in one of your talks. I think it was at the Undoing Aging 2018. And how do you foresee these drugs being prescribed to people once they have FDA approval? You know, would people at like the age of 50 start taking these drugs every day?
I mean, ultimately, what I'd like to see is that maybe at 50 we bring people in and we really look at specific parameters of aging in that individual using a lot of these new biomarkers that are being developed, also standard markers, family risk, lifestyle, and try to take a precision medicine approach to aging. So that, because what you need to optimize your health span would probably be overlapping but not identical with what I would need. So we need to be able to identify the specific requirements that an individual has and try to treat those. Now, we're not there yet. And so to start with, we need to just test single compounds in aging studies and try to validate that they have effects, try to continue to develop these biomarkers, and then ultimately work toward that precision approach. Now, you know, we don't really know what the FDA path is to approving a drug in this context. But some of those things I listed are natural products, and so they're already on the market. So you can, for instance, buy nicotinamide riboside or NMN, which are NAD precursors. And there's another molecule that we've developed partly in our lab called alpha-ketoglutarate that's already available on the market through a company that we're working with. So there are things that people can test now. I think that none of those things have full validation in humans, but they're safe, natural products. So those might be the first things that really take off, I would predict, because they don't need, depending on what claims you make, they don't need FDA approval. Now, drugs, you know, is probably a slower process. Ultimately, the drugs may have a bigger effect, but we still don't have a clear path to getting the drug approved for healthy aging. And the good news is the FDA is paying attention and listening and participating in the process, but it still could be a while. First of all, none of them are validated in humans yet, but even if they are, it still could be a while before we figure out what that path is to delivering that to the population. But natural products can be sold now, and also medical diets or maybe medical diets is not quite the right word, but diets that are designed to enhance longevity may be very beneficial as well. So there's a diet, for instance, you can buy from a company called L-Nutra that I'm actually involved with, full disclosure, but it's this diet mimics fasting, so it tries to give you some of the benefits of fasting, but you still have something to eat. So that's another product that's available. And then, of course, the gold standard is still exercise. I mean, if you want to combine cardiovascular fitness and resistance training, and you can sustain that in a productive way, you're I think, very likely to increase your health span. I mean, there's a bigger debate about whether that might affect maximum lifespan or not, but I think it will get more people to the maximum lifespan, which is a big step forward.
Yeah. To be clear, your goal would be to help people get up to like 90, 100, 110 years old with very rejuvenated health and not obtaining the heart disease and cancer and lung diseases.
Yeah, but look, I think health span and lifespan are going to track together largely, and I'm not against increasing lifespan as well. I think that's a good thing. But from an economic point of view, right now, the case needs to be made toward health span. And partly the reason for that is that the public doesn't understand what we're doing. When we talk about making people live longer, a lot of people think that means we're going to have people hooked up to oxygen tanks, you know, and that's not the goal. In fact, that's what medicine's doing now.
Yeah.
Our goal is to do the opposite, which is to keep them healthy, keep them from being frail, keep them from having sarcopenia, keep them from getting Alzheimer's disease to a much later age. And that is a huge economic victory if we can make it happen. So I really think it's a revolution in medicine, right? And it's a needed one. This, you know, nobody wants to wait till they get sick and then get treated for it. Even if the treatment is effective, you don't want to do that. So much better to just not get sick in the first place. And I think it'll be easier too. But the medical community is still focused on sick care right now. And so it's a challenge to try to move this forward.
Okay. And are you taking any of the treatments like off-label, or the supplements like metformin or even rapamycin
I'm actually trying the
any precursors?
I'm actually trying the alpha-ketoglutarate product. It's actually a combination of two natural products, but partly because it's available, and so I've been taking it for a few months. I don't feel comfortable like having something on the marketplace without at least trying it myself first. So, so I am doing that, and but I try to really focus on a relatively healthy diet, excuse me, and exercise as much as I can.
And so what is that again? You said some form of glutamate?
Alpha-ketoglutarate. It's a TCA cycle component. There was a paper published in 2004 that it extends lifespan in worms. And we've been doing a lot of testing in mice, and we find that it has a modest increase in lifespan, but it dramatically reduces frailty in the animals. There are human studies that are just starting right now. But we've had a number of people that have been on the compound for a while. And also it's a widely tested natural product. There are many clinical trials and no safety concerns. So we're not terribly worried about any potential toxicities of the compound. But we still need to do more testing to validate how big of an effect it has in humans. I think that, but it's on the market. So it's, you know, I really think that people should be informed and they should be able to make their own choices. It's incumbent on us to not put anything out there that's toxic, certainly. And it's also incumbent upon companies that are producing compounds to be honest about what data they have. But beyond that, you know, I think that if people feel like it might work for them, and they should have the opportunity to try it.
Yeah. It'd be so awesome to see some of these mice studies translate into humans. You know, you see health extension in some mice of like up to like 30%, and even the highest I've seen for maximum life extension, the maximum lifespan, extending that is around like 6%. Have you seen anything higher extending?
Well, rapamycin can extend maximum lifespan about 15 to 20% in mice. So I think that, and remember that almost none of these compounds have been optimized. You know, if you really want to do this right, you would take maybe 5 different doses of the compound and try to get a dose response curve for life expectancy. And you might get a much bigger effect if you hit the right dose. But there's so little academic research dollars in the field that you just don't have enough money to do those kinds of experiments. So in most cases, you take your best guess at one dose and see what you can get. Now, rapamycin's been studied more than that, but most of the other compounds has just been like one dose. So we don't even know what's optimal. One thing we're also trying right now is to do personalized dosing. So we're using an artificial intelligence-based paradigm to try to, for each mouse, we want to optimize what we think is the best dose for that mouse. And we're just doing those studies now. But we're hopeful that we can get a much bigger effect because we're now giving each animal the right amount of the drug. And if that works, we'll try to incorporate that strategy into our human testing as well.
Excellent. And you're doing that at the at your lab, the Candy Lab?
In Singapore, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Sweet. That'd be awesome. And 15-20%, that would get us up to like what, like 140, like 100, or if you take 15-10% of 120, that gets you up to like past 150 years old.
That's maximum, right? That's assuming you were going to get to the maximum lifespan to start with. So So the average life expectancy is in the mid 80s. So that would be a better way to calculate. So you might get people closer to 100. I think that, but we don't know whether things are going to be analogous yet. I would predict that things will be more conserved between mouse aging studies and human aging studies than they are between mouse disease studies and human disease studies. If you take the animal models of Alzheimer's disease, they're very poor models. You have to take a mouse and engineer a bunch of human mutations into it so that it gets something that looks like Alzheimer's disease. And then they do that, and then the mice get sick and when they're 5 months old or 6 months old. And that's not an old mouse. That's a young mouse with Alzheimer's disease. And then you develop treatments for it that are somewhat effective. And then they test them in old humans, and it turns out it doesn't work. And so, so you're creating a non-natural situation in the mice, and you're creating it at the wrong time in the mouse's lifespan. It makes it a suboptimal model. When we're looking at natural aging in a mouse, we're comparing that to natural aging in humans. Now, obviously, there are differences, but our bet is that most of the common pathways that regulate aging are conserved between mice and humans. And if they are, then modifying those pathways is more likely to have similar effects, I think. So my bet, and it's just a bet, is that we'll see more conservation between mouse aging and human aging than we will between artificial mouse diseases and human diseases.
Okay. Yeah, I saw a study recently using machine learning on the various longevity pathways, and the machine intelligence came up with a few different molecules. It was the pathways for metformin and rapamycin. I'll send it to you if you haven't seen it. Do you expect to see aging cured in your lifetime or reversed? Yeah.
Go ahead. I think we'll be able to modify aging in my lifetime. Cured is a big word, and I don't. I'm more. I like what a lot of the futurists are doing. When Aubrey gets out there and predicts that lifespan is going to go up dramatically, I think we need people thinking like him.
Yeah.
But I kind of take a different approach, and because I think a lot of people that listen to that sort of futurist mindset think that, oh, these people are crazy. I don't think they're crazy, but I think it doesn't resonate with the whole population. What I want to do is not make predictions for humans beyond what we can do in mice. And right now we can get about a 30% lifespan extension in mice. So if we can just accomplish that in humans, that's already a massive change.
Yeah.
And I agree that if, we'll continue to get better at how we develop interventions. So it'll probably go up beyond that. But curing aging, who knows? I mean, I'm not opposed to it.
Yeah. And imagine getting somebody up to, even if you start getting people up to 110, that becomes like really easy to do. I mean, that's a lot of time to conduct even more research.
Yeah, I mean, but if we do that, it's going to change the whole fabric of society when you think about it, right? You're going to have great grandparents alive and maybe great great grandparents alive. Think of all the birthday cards, So it's I think overall those changes are going to be very positive, but it's going to be a different world if we can be successful, and I think it'll be a better world too.
Okay, excellent. What's some great research that you've seen in the last year that really stood out to you?
Well, I think that I don't know if it's in the last year, but I think that there's a tendency to talk about interventions, but these changes in biomarkers are also pretty amazing. Not changes, but the identification of biomarkers. Things like methylation clock. I'm working with a scientist in China that we can predict age very accurately from facial patterns. There's studies that predict age from microbiome, and people have been trying to come up with molecular biomarkers of aging for a long time, and it's been largely unsuccessful. But now suddenly there's a whole range of different candidates, and these are important because I think the first thing we want to do with the interventions is see whether they move the needle on these biomarkers. So I kind of want to cross-validate interventions in biomarkers by testing them against each other, and that's a lot cheaper and takes a lot less people, at least potentially, than the TAME study, which is a 3,000 person study that costs tens of millions of dollars. I'm not against that study either. And maybe at the end of the day, that's what needs to be done. But right now, I'd like to test a whole range of interventions.
Yeah.
And so we think using these biomarkers is a more economical strategy to test multiple different interventional approaches to aging.
So like testing rapamycin and metformin and
Well,
like
singly at first. I mean, combining them is interesting too, but I think to start with, we'd like to take 8 or 10 of them and test them individually and see which interventions impact which biomarkers. And
okay.
obviously, we'll measure other physiologic parameters as well. But I think that I don't think anyone can accurately predict which of these interventions is going to work best in humans. Now, people will tell you their model's the best. That's what scientists do, but we just don't have the data to back that up. And I like rapamycin, and the data looks promising, but I can't say that it's better for human aging than nicotinamide riboside or AKG or metformin. We have to do those studies, and we want to take an agnostic approach and test them as opposed to just betting on one horse. We want to bet on all the horses.
Yeah, it's gonna be so exciting when we see people get to like 122. Then like every year it's just gonna be like everyone's gonna be cheering on these people living.
Well, there's a while to get there, so
yeah. That's one of the difficult things with these studies on increasing maximum lifespan, is because you have to wait such a long time.
Yeah, I think the bigger parameters is you're gonna, hopefully, if we're successful, you'll see 90-year-olds, out playing tennis and people still working and being very active. There are a few examples of people that are like that in their 90s, but it's very few, and I think we can change that number. Instead of going to visit your grandfather in a living center because he has dementia, you can go out and play golf with him. I mean, that kind of thing would be already a massive improvement.
Yeah. Excellent. I highly recommend everyone check out Dr. Kennedy's one of his papers called the title is Geroscience: Linking Aging to Chronic Disease. I thought that was a great paper to just get a general understanding of this field of aging. And that was all the questions I had for you, Dr. Kennedy. Thanks so much for talking with me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Anytime.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, have a nice day.
Thanks, you too.